Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to take the articles, research, and notes you've shared with us and really distill them into something, genuinely surprising
And actionable.
and actionable. And today's Deep Dive, it's into territory we don't explore that often, how we talk about faith, history, and power.
Right. We're looking at sources that make a really bold claim. They argue that most interreligious dialogue is, well, fundamentally flawed because it operates inside Christian conceptual categories.
Exactly. And the sources say that for a dialogue between, say, Hindus and Jews to actually work, you need entirely new ground rules.
A whole new framework.
Our mission for you today is to get to that aha moment, to show you why real-world history and what the sources call social symmetry are the only way forward. We're really unpacking how power dynamics shape almost every single one of these conversations.
Okay, so where do we start?
We start with this really sharp anecdote. The author, a specialist in Indo-Judaic studies, is in Sri Lanka. He's organizing a dialogue session for a very famous Catholic scholar, Leonard Swidler.
Right. Swidler is a big name in interreligious conversation. He was championing it.
He was, and the author was expecting, this genuine openness. But instead, the Buddhist monks there kept saying the same thing. They call dialogue a Christian trick, a ploy used to convert the unsuspecting.
Ooh.
Yeah. And the author felt naive arguing with them, thinking, surely they're misjudging modern intentions.
But here's the first huge revelation from the sources. Those monks were not being cynical. They were being historically accurate.
They were.
Absolutely. This is the big contradiction. Swidler himself had this idealistic first commandment of interreligious dialogue. Its purpose is to learn, not to convert.
Okay, that sounds good. A sincere exchange.
It does. But then you look at the actual institutional mandates of, the Catholic Church, the suspicion is completely justified. The sources point out that even after Vatican II, the new Code of Canon Law defined dialogue as a way for missionaries to, yes, engage sincerely, but specifically to lead their audience to the good news.
Wait, seriously. So even the modern, seemingly progressive structure was designed as a pathway for conversion?
It was stated explicitly. The Vatican's encyclical Redemptoris Missio says, and this is a direct quote, interreligious dialogue is a part of the Church's evangelizing mission.
Wow.
So the monks weren't paranoid. They were just describing policy. Dialogue was, in effect, evangelism with a very pleasant introductory meeting.
That just changes everything. It
Yeah.
means the whole thing was often just, as the source puts it, conversion with better manners.
And this history, this ulterior motive, it runs deep.
Which brings us to the Christian Sannyasins, like Father Bede Griffiths. He was a famous Christian ascetic in India, and he argued that the greatest missionaries were the ones who could successfully pose as Hindu holy men, just to win converts.
And this wasn't just some theory. You have these historical examples. Look at Ricci and the Jesuits in China. They didn't show up as priests.
No, they disguised themselves as mandarins. They studied the Chinese classics, blended in with the elite, all to get a sympathetic hearing.
And de Nobili did the exact same thing in India. Lived as a sannyasi, studied Hindu scriptures, all to win over Brahmins. It's a pattern. Infiltrate, accommodate, and then, convert.
And it all comes from this triumphalist ideology, this belief that other religions, Judaism, Hinduism, Islam, they aren't valid paths. They're just providential preparation for Christianity.
That's the trap. If you truly believe your faith is the completion, the fulfillment, the correction of every other faith, then any dialogue has a hidden, unequal agenda baked right in.
And that inequality is in the theology itself.
It is. Griffiths' framework is so revealing. He basically took the traditional Christian trivialization of Judaism, that it was just a preparation for Christ, and applied it to all other non-Christian faiths.
He said Christ came to correct, complete, and fulfill them.
Yes, but it's the language he uses that's so chilling. Griffiths argued that Jews, and by extension other religions, must undergo a kind of death to be born again in Christ.
A kind of death.
Yeah. And when you think about the actual history of persecution and forced conversions aimed at Jews by Christians, the idea that the dominant group is suggesting the minority must undergo a death to engage.
Right.
Well, it just disqualifies any real conversation between equals.
That structural inequality leads right to the next big problem, the conceptual bias.
The Christian categories.
Exactly. Christianity becomes the unspoken intermediary. So when you have Hindu-Christian dialogue, it almost always ends up being about two things: the search for the absolute and this idea of mysticism, which is just experiencing that absolute.
And that focus comes from a very specific Christian-centric definition of religion. It values a creator god and certain ideas about cosmology. If you don't have that, scholars in the West have literally debated if you even count as a religion.
Right, like with Buddhism. For decades, the debate was, is this even a religion?
And it leads to active distortion. Christian theologians would just misappropriate concepts to make them fit. Swidler, for instance, tried to redefine anatta, the core Buddhist idea of non-self, as a true deep self. He's basically trying to smuggle a soul into Buddhism.
Just to find common ground.
Or trying to find a positive spin for shunyata, emptiness, when the Theravada understanding is that reality is just. Sasara, the cycle of rebirth, not some divine ground of being. The source calls this conversion by definition. You just redefine their religion into something you can agree with.
It just shows this massive cultural gulf. The Christian starting point is doctrine, orthodoxy. But what if that's not what defines your faith?
And that's why I love that Hindu joke in the sources.
Oh, it's perfect. A Hindu meets a Christian, asks about the dietary code, learns there isn't one, and the Hindu concludes that it must not be a religion but a way of life.
That joke gets right to the core of it. The centrality of orthopraxy, of practice, of ritual, of daily life over just abstract theology.
And this is exactly why the Hindu-Jewish encounter is so different. It's defined by two things that are totally absent from that Christian model.
Okay, what are they?
First, the primacy of orthopraxy over orthodoxy. Most forms of Hinduism and Judaism value practice, dietary laws, life cycle rituals, more than some rigid, unified doctrine. That's huge common ground.
And the second one is even more critical.
It's symmetry, a relationship between equals, par cum pari. It means one community cannot hold social or political power over the other.
Which is almost never the case between Christians and Jews globally.
Almost never. But the source points out that in Kerala, South India, their relations were symmetrical for centuries. It was unique. And that equality, that symmetry, is the absolute foundation for a real conversation.
And that symmetry isn't just, theoretical. It's rooted in a shared visceral experience.
Which brings us to the most powerful story in the source material. The author is at the Vatican Museum of World Religions with a Thai Buddhist monk.
And the museum itself is laid out in this subtle Christian hierarchy.
Right. Pagans, then Hindus and Buddhists, then Muslims, then Jews. So they're in the Buddhist art section, and the monk just stops cold. He's staring at a large Thai Buddha rupa, and he's horrified.
What did he say?
He whispered, "That rupa was stolen from my monastery. I heard Christians had taken it, but I never believed it. A sacred object, stolen and now displayed as just an artifact."
And then the author has the same experience.
Moments later, in the Judaism section, there's a Torah scroll. The label says it's from the Great Synagogue of Budapest, his mother's family's synagogue. And he realizes his cousins who were slaughtered in the Holocaust might have read from that very scroll.
It's the same shock, the same pain.
Exactly. The source calls it a symmetry occasioned by the religious oppression meted out against our peoples. It's an equality built on a shared understanding of being a victimized minority. That creates instant common ground.
But there is a challenge from the Jewish side, right? The question of idolatry and the Hindu use of images, or murti.
Yes, that's a crucial point, and it can't be glossed over. The question is whether Judaism has to reject Hinduism out of hand. The sources, though, point to some very nuanced rabbinic views.
And what did they say?
That Gentiles can acknowledge God through mediation. As long as God is the ultimate object of concern, using intermediaries doesn't necessarily count as idolatry in that context. It's not an obstacle to dialogue, it's a subject for dialogue.
So you have to actually talk to each other to figure it out, not just impose a definition from the outside.
Exactly. Okay, so once you have that symmetry, once you set aside the Christian conceptual framework, what does a real Hindu-Jewish conversation look like? What's on the agenda?
The sources lay out 4 points, all focused on real lived history, not abstracts.
Number 1, mysticism and esotericism. But framed correctly. There was this historic Tibetan-Jewish dialogue in 1990, and the Dalai Lama was genuinely shocked by Judaism's rich esoteric traditions. He said the overlap often lies in esotericism.
So this isn't about some universal absolute. It's about dedicated comparative study of intellectual traditions, comparing Talmudic and Hindu logic or methods of scriptural interpretation. Real deep stuff.
Point 2 brings us back to orthopraxy.
Food.
Dietary loss. Because both traditions value practice so highly, the archetypal mundane issue of food becomes deeply spiritual.
And it's so practical. The sources talk about New York City, where you have Tamil restaurateurs selling kosher doshas, or Hindu Brahmin restaurants being a safe bet for kosher dining.
They share the same practical concerns over things like rennet or lard.
It connects the sacred to the mundane. Both codes are about the sanctification of food, so this cooperation over a meal, it's a shared spiritual act.
The third point is profound. It's about preserving culture in diaspora and modernization. And this is where Jews are seen as the first diasporized and first modernized people.
Right. And other groups have used that experience as a roadmap. When Tibetans were forced into exile in 1959, their leaders explicitly wrote that they needed inspiration from a people whose determination and hard work achieved their long-awaited goal, Israel.
A direct reference to Jewish perseverance. It's a model.
It is. And in the same way, American Hindus look at American Jews, the ADL, Hebrew day schools, youth summer camps, as models for how you maintain your religio-cultural identity while also fully participating in American life.
A lesson in surviving modernity. Okay, finally, point 4. Political cooperation. What do American Hindus and Jews have in common politically?
A lot, actually. Both have a huge interest in a strong secular public education system. Both fight discrimination in housing and the workplace.
And crucially,
Crucially, both view the calls for the Christianization of America with profound alarm. A state-sanctioned religion is a direct threat to their survival as minorities. They also share strong ties to their countries of origin, India and Israel, and try to influence American foreign policy accordingly.
this whole deep dive really reconfigures how we even define religion. The Hindu-Jewish dialogue allows two non-Christian traditions to meet symmetrically, focusing on shared history and practice without being squeezed through that distorting Christian filter.
Which leads to the final critical warning from the sources, and it's directed specifically at Jews engaging in this space.
Which is?
Hindu-Jewish dialogue must not be treated as an addendum to Hindu-Christian dialogue. It has to be its own thing.
Why is that so important?
Because the sources urge Jewish participants to actively avoid those Hindu-Christian conversations. What most Hindus know about Judaism, they unfortunately learned from Christian missionaries who see Judaism as just a step on the path toward Christianity.
So you have to define yourself on your own terms.
We must insist on it and avoid being absorbed into that historical Judeo-Christian fiction that missionaries created.
And that insistence, that's the core lesson here. This whole discussion about dialogue between equals, it all comes down to a question of identity. If we agree that real conversation has to be with real people, not our projections of them, then it leaves you with the question. How do we ensure that we fully define our own tradition, our own identity, first understanding our practices, our history, our challenges, before we even try to find that common ground with anyone else? That's something to take away and really mull over.